Hi, everyone. This is CricketSong with Lunar Wisdom, and you're watching another episode of The Sacred Circle. We're here tonight with Renee, my new usual co-host. Say hey to everyone, Renee.
Hey, everyone.
And tonight, the long-awaited, anticipated episode with Raven Digitalis, the author of Esoteric Empathy. Say hello to everyone, Raven.
How's it going, guys?
Yay, I am so excited. We tried to do this episode in February, and with technical difficulties and then busy schedules, and Raven's been going around doing author signings I've seen from your Facebook page. But we finally did it, and tonight's the night. So for those of you who may not know, and I would urge you, if you haven't watched the review that I did of his book, if you haven't had a chance to watch it after this episode, you're going to want to go look at that review and then purchase yourself a copy of this wonderful, very comprehensive book on empathy. And that's what we're going to be talking about this evening. So for those of you who might not know who Raven is, I'm going to give him a little opportunity to introduce himself to you, give it a little bit of background of the spiritual path that you follow, if you would.
Yeah. Well, I live here in Missoula, Montana, which, oh, hey, I just got a new kitty, too. So let's introduce him first. This is Efi.
Oh.
He wanted to come say hi on air, apparently. So yeah, first order of business, black cats.
Mm-hmm.
3 black cats here. And Efi is a very rare Manx who has a full tail. So yeah, he's the real star of the show. Anyway, I live here in Missoula, Montana, and born and raised here. I have a very supportive family who encourage, art and spirituality and different alternative forms of expression. So I'm very thankful for that. My priestess and partner and I have been operating our multicultural nonprofit temple for 13 years. Excuse me, Efi. See, he wants to be the star. So we've been operating as a multicultural nonprofit temple for 13 plus years. Whoa, don't climb up there. Sorry. And our celebrations here and our workshops here range, from Mexican sugar skulls to Hindu holidays, to Wiccan and pagan Sabbats, and men's rituals, women's rituals, old world skill workshops, and everything in between. So we've got this big mix of different things that we offer to the community here based on our visions. And Esta, my priestess, is the co-founder, she's the co-founder and the visionary. So the majority of this Ima Obscuri, or OAO, which means work of the great primordial mother, was channeled by her and created by her and crafted. So we've been upholding this system here in Montana for all that time, and each year just keeps getting better and better. And we've got a wonderful, vibrant community. Currently here in Montana, we've been having the fires. It's forest fire season, and it's been crazy with really thick smoke. And at the moment, there's rain coming down, and magic for the rain is coming to a head that so many people have been doing and praying for and casting for, which is really magical. So it's so nice to see that rain, because this absolutely thick.
Yeah. I
don't know if you guys get that over there.
We had lots of rain. We haven't had, rained a few days ago, thunderstorms, because I'm in New England. So
don't get the forest fires over there, though.
No forest fires over here. No.
Lucky.
Yeah. So I want to dive right into your book, because I have 2 pages of questions.
Awesome.
So
yep.
I want to, I'm sorry?
I was just going to say, this is my 4th book, and it's on Llewellyn, called Esoteric Empathy, and it's a guide for empaths, and for those that don't know, magical and metaphysical guide for empaths. So
It's the best book I've read on empaths, that's for sure.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It took a long time.
I was excited when you had said you were writing this. So actually, questions. First question I have is the cover. Can you talk to me about the choice in the cover?
So originally, well, Llewellyn has an amazing art department. I work with Kevin and Donna Birch Brown, and they're friends of ours and friends of the temple that I cooperate here. And there's wonderful people. Really, everybody at Llewellyn's amazing. And so they really listen at the art department layout suggestions. So it's really a collaborative effort. Originally, I had that symbol on the front, which is the Anahata chakra symbol, old Vedic chakra, mocked up with the right hand, and have that right in the middle of the right hand as the cover for the book. That was my original mock-up. But they said, you know, if you have a big front of the book, it looks like a palmistry. And so they just chose to go with just the symbol itself.
And the color is perfect, right?
Yeah,
the green.
So the green for the heart chakra symbol. And there's some traditional Sanskrit bijas, Sanskrit letters there.
So then this page.
That's that would be a spell.
That's what I thought. That's why I was asking. I'm like, huh.
But you know, keep it secret, keep it safe.
Okay. Just curious.
You're like the third person to ask. That's
only the third?
Not only the third. Yeah.
Huh.
But,
well,
yeah,
I of course it is. I looked at that and went, yeah, I'm going to ask about that. Okay.
And then on the reverse, the Sri Yantra, the goddess symbol, or the symbol for Devi or Durga, on the reverse of that black page, on the interior of the front cover.
Yeah, I was just going to say this.
Yep, and that's the Sri Yantra.
Nice.
A very powerful goddess symbol there.
The setup of the book, I don't want to go too much into like a review of it, because people can watch that review. I did a very in-depth review of this book. You should go watch that video.
Yeah, and I saw that, and it made me very happy. I really appreciate your praise. That meant so much to me.
Yeah, well, it's a great, like I said, I mean, it's a really good book and very comprehensive.
You're quoted in it. I get to quote
I am
you
quoted, page 9. Page 9. So how did you decide on the title, Esoteric Empathy?
And my priestess and partner, Esta McNevin, she channeled that because I had originally had the Empaths workbook as a title, and it was kind of determined, well, it's not really a workbook. It is, of course, for empaths, but Llewellyn wanted to use the word empathy more than empath. It was more searchable, I guess. And so during a trance channeling session of sorts, during a ritual, I was like, you know, what is the name of this book? What is this piece supposed to be called now that it's almost complete? She's like, it's called Esoteric Empathy. I'm like, of course it is. Okay.
Yeah, it's a great title.
Ellen, they're like,
yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
And so what's the difference between being empathic and being an empath?
Everybody's empathic to one degree or another. Empathy is a natural state of being for humans and animals to different degrees, and everybody has it to a different degree. Those that can be called empaths are those who experience empathy to a much higher degree than is considered average. Just like, you know, everybody has psychic powers, and everybody has artistic talent, just at different degrees and with different things and at different levels. And when people have extreme empathy, then they can consider themselves empaths. And people who could consider themselves empaths are often, you know, prone to researching spirituality and creating spiritual practice as well. So it provides a good bridge that way too. I think emotions and spirit are connected.
I agree. so much. I agree so much.
And empathy is totally biological. It's evolutionary too. It's not just a mystical thing. Some people who are more scientifically minded might not empathic research as much when they see how much the New Age has taken it and reinterpreted what empathy is. But these are just different levels of interpretation. In that book, I was really sure and really careful to combine scientific and psychotherapeutic research in which empathy is hugely studied in modern times, finally, alongside spiritual and magical and occult studies. So it's really a unique kind of hodgepodge for unique people like us.
I know, right? Can you explain what emotional contagion and counter contagion is and how they relate to an empath?
So emotional contagion or emotional contagion is when we catch the emotion of another person. So, if I just suddenly smile and it feels good, and then you suddenly smile, we experience emotional contagion. You caught my emotion. And you can experience that with, any emotion. And for people who are, I believe, more sensitive to the spirit world, for example, or to vibrations and energies, we can catch those emotional imprints, and those affect us. And we can catch those metaphysical imprints. So I think emotional contagion works on many different levels. Emotional counter contagion is as well, which refers to not responding as the emotion itself, but as a reaction. So, for example, say that you were supposed to wash the dishes, and then your roommate comes up and says, "Why you didn't wash the dishes? This really hurts me. You were supposed to do that." You wouldn't respond the way that they're responding. You might respond with shame instead and be like, "Oh, shoot, I forgot. I'm sorry." Or if they're angry, they're like, "What the hell?" You wouldn't necessarily get angry in return. The counter contagion response would be like, "Shoot, dang it, I forgot." So empathy doesn't always directly reflect the same emotion. Sometimes with the case of counter contagion, it can be an emotion that is reactive as a response to the emotion that has been absorbed or experienced around you, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. That makes sense. You get that, Renee?
Mm-hmm.
So what's the difference between a psychic and an empath?
Well, I think that psychics work on the mental level and the intuitive level. Of course, mediums are also psychics. Empaths are psychics as well in a different way. I consider empaths to be emotional psychics. That's one definition I really like for empaths. Whereas traditional psychics might be more prone to receiving impressions through different senses, clairsentience, clairvoyance, clairaudience, all the clairs. Whereas empaths are more prone to just take on that emotion. Boom, there it is. Uh-oh, what do we do with it now? And that can be confusing because we're very emotional too. So we have to differentiate between self and other to the best of our ability.
So, and this is where it got me to thinking, because I've always described myself as an empath. Well, not always. I didn't have a word for it way back in the day when I was younger. I didn't know what it was. People just used to call me overly sensitive. But when I discovered that there was a word for it, I was like, oh, okay, that's what I am. But then I had been doing readings, reading people. And then someone suggested that I was clairsentient back in the day. So if I go with your definition, which I find very interesting, and it gave me a lot of things to contemplate, if I go with the idea that a clairsentient is more of a mental or intellectual psychic and an empath is more of a emotional psychic, could I be tapping into both, or could anybody be tapping into both?
Yeah, that is something that I explore in the book too. Like for myself, I'm much more empathic than I am psychic. I don't have the best forethought. I'm not the most mentally insightful, I suppose, and I have a terrible memory. So I'm definitely much more emotional. But I do know some people who are really great psychics in the traditional sense, or mediums, and empaths on top of it. And it's very astounding. So I think some people just have different degrees of these different gifts, and nobody's better or worse. It just means, different abilities. So I don't think that necessarily more empathy means less mental psychicism.
Right. And that makes sense
for
to me. Oops, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. For me, I feel it does. For other people, I've observed people have a lot of balance of both.
Yeah, because if I think of it in a spectrum, because everything to me is the spectrum, you have absolute or black and white and all the colors in between and all the degrees with everything. At least that's how I view the world and the universe. That would make sense that, nobody is, or probably, maybe, very rare people are on either absolute ends, and most of us fall somewhere in between. So that would make sense to me. Mentally, it would make sense to me. I don't know.
Yeah, it really is all a spectrum. It's all a big rainbow.
So what is the connection between empaths and witches and other magical practitioners? Because all these questions do stem from the book. So he covers all this in his book.
Yeah. Well, witches and magical folk tend to worship the cycles of and observe the cycles of nature and the cycles of the cosmos and the cycles of the self. And so these are all, very significant things that keep us alive in this moment of reality. And I feel that emotion brings these things to life. So these aren't just stagnant experiences. When we feel the wonder and beauty from the moon, that is an emotional and spiritual connection. It's not just this lunar body that's just chilling out and we're just like, that's cool. It's more, this deeper connection. It's magical, esoteric connection. So I think emotions bring to life all these different spheres and aspects, magical and spiritual work. If we, as witches and occultists, use emotions first before we perform magical work or ritual work of any type to effect change into the self or other, then we're coming from a place of more awareness, I think. So if we can step back and be really emotionally aware of ourself and other, and how is this ritual, this ceremony, this spell, this meditation, these prayers, how are these going to affect everything emotionally? If we're aware of that and we come with compassion first and approach with compassion that the Eastern mystics are always talking about, then I think we can more accurately perform our magic and more ethically perform our magic as well.
Yeah.
So I think emotions are a key in our magical work.
I agree. Like you said before, a little earlier, where you were connecting emotions to spirituality, and then we take that into magical practice and how it makes you feel. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, I totally agree. Not that I have to, but I do. You mentioned
feel free to disagree anytime.
Right. You mentioned in the book that there's a concern with empaths being manipulators. What is this concern you were talking about? Can you explain it a little? And does their ability connect with the concept of witchcraft and magic? I mean, does that concern sort of flow into that as well?
Well, all of life is magical, and our interactions with each other are ritualistic. And so if we're interacting with each other in a positive way, we're creating a very positive ritual for our lives and other people's lives, and creating those rippling effects of echoing vibrations out into the world, however we choose to approach our social experiences. So with manipulation, empaths are often the first people to, because they're often open and more innocent, naive, gullible, and they're more open to other people's not only guidance, but their manipulative actions, self-serving actions. So a lot of the time when people are very empathic, or when the empathic senses are alight in them to a large degree, and then they become manipulated and go through a bad social experience or a bad relationship where somebody was very self-serving, they might shut off those emotions and try not to be empathic because it's scary and they don't want to be vulnerable. So you see this overreaction happen with people a lot, because it can be scary to feel like you don't have control. But it really is all about gaining balance and gaining control and awareness and maintaining compassion no matter what, and maintaining empathy, yet still defining boundaries. The biggest thing, I think, is discernment. So that empaths can cease being manipulated by others if they can step back and discern the situation from the mind. And I talk about that in the book, stepping back and bringing it to the mind. You can bring it to a cognitive and mental place when experiencing high emotions with others, which are for better or worse, and analyze the situation that way instead of just feeling the emotions. That can be really dangerous. There's actually an article called The Case Against Empathy, which argues that simply empathic, and that's it, can be very dangerous and actually can create, manipulative cycles and patterns, and can encourage others to do whatever they want. And so we're going for balance here. And then, empaths manipulate themselves if they choose to, unless it's for, self-preservation or for the greater good. But empaths have the ability to, change their micro expressions, and because they can feel what the other person is feeling if they're experienced enough. So they can manipulate through micro expressions, through tone of voice, through these little psychic and empathic communicators with another person who's around them. So it is a possibility, but most empaths don't choose not to manipulate like that. And if they do start doing that, they don't do it for very long because of the ethics of it. Empaths thirst for real connection with people, and not just, surface connections, because that is a distancing mechanism to manipulate. So it might feel safer for a while, if an empath has had a bad experience emotionally, to separate. But after a while, most empaths are like, no, I don't want to separate from other people. I want to have real connections, even if that includes pain sometimes. That's okay. That's life. So
Yeah. I'm getting a little teary-eyed over here because it speaks so much to a personal experience in my past, with the whole idea of experiencing a very emotionally painful event, and doing the distancing and manipulating, consciously manipulating people because it was a distancing thing, and then finding that it wasn't fulfilling in my past. It was empty and getting lonely, and then finally saying, what am I doing? This is not what I want, and finally reconnecting. But that's exactly an experience I had. But I do find, not only, in that experience that I had with the ability to manipulate situations and manipulate people or influence them, that other empaths that I've known who have gone through traumatic experiences similar are able to do that. I've seen them do that with people who are very open to the influence of them, the very subtle influences. Yeah, I agree. I think it, like you said, though, seeking that balance is what's most important. At least I think so too.
yeah,
Renee,
well, I'm glad
do
you
you?
can empathize, and
Yeah.
and I'm glad that you've learned from that experience too. That's life, and we have to forgive ourselves for our mistakes and learn from them and move on and reconcile the best we're able to, because empaths make mistakes all the time.
Right. Right. I guess, self-awareness is probably the biggest thing. I mean, I know you talk about it in the book, and I'm sure I have some questions about it, but I think self-awareness, when you have a really understanding of who you are and an understanding of, what your motives are and where you're coming from, and a deep connection, at least for me, with the gods or with nature or the spirits or whatever it is that you work with, really having that understanding and connection with that, you're able to find that balance, and understand yourself. And then you can feel through, interactions with other people.
Definitely. And self-awareness is one of those things that's a constantly growing and evolving thing, because once we think we know ourselves, there's another layer. And so we have to dig deep into there and really be as honest and humble with ourselves as we can. And that's reason why at our temple here, and a lot of magical and pagan folk around the world encourage, jumping onto the cycles of nature and doing things like burning a poppet at Samhain, and weaving the maypole at Beltane, because these things work on the psychological and emotional level, and as to those cycles of the year, and thusly the cycles of ourselves, because we can, bring up these sorrows and awarenesses and challenges time of year leading up to Samhain. We can more easily harness those energies and create a magic that is aligned with the seasonal flow by aligning ourselves there. And so I think empaths are often prone to that sort of magical work because it's so cathartic and so effective.
I agree. So speaking of, magical practitioners and witches, how would empaths or empathic abilities help the witch? You kind of talked about doing magic, but is there any other way that if we feel drawn as witches or magical practitioners to be in service, that we can use these abilities to help others?
Well, through empathy, we can really start to understand what another person or people are experiencing, and that can make our assistance of them more accurate. We can more accurately advise. You'll find a lot of empaths who are therapists and counselors, many of whom are also pagans and witches. I've met quite a few. And, it's because we do want to help. We do want to make the world a better place. Get into witchcraft and magic. At first, it's often for the power or for the sense of power. And eventually that shifts into empowerment, which is different. So, that empowerment is very personal. It's a connection to the gods and to the higher self and to the cycles of karma. And so when we connect to these higher cycles, I think we can more easily see the karma that's at play and see what kind of magical work needs to be accomplished to help that karma, help another person, help oneself, and help just the situations in general. So, there are a million people out there who you bring them a picture of somebody and you say, curse this person for me. They'll do it for $300, $8,000, it's a sliding scale. There are people out there who will perform
$5, depending on how hard they're hurting.
Yep. So people will unethically practice magic. They're all out there. But if you want to actually get on the magical path and the evolutionary magical path, I think empathy and emotions and compassion, self-awareness, those are priorities.
Yeah. $5 too. Yeah.
Somewhere else.
Yeah, I know, right? You talk about compassion fatigue. Can you explain to the viewers what that is and how might someone identify it within themselves, and then what they might do to rectify that?
Yeah, my friend Cami, who is a yogini and a kirtan artist here in town, told me about compassion fatigue, and so I looked it up and incorporated that into my book. And it's really analysis of what happens after you're too giving and too compassionate and too open. After a while, you just get this fatigue. That happens a lot in like nursing and group homework, caretaking work towards other people, especially when those people are draining and they don't always reciprocate. Working at a group home, for example, can be a thankless job. You can get, bossed around by management and mistreated. I speak from experience. And that can lead to compassion fatigue. And it's a very dangerous place because that, if you get tired of caring because it seems like a one-way street, then that, from the job, then it can bleed over into other aspects of life, and you don't want that. So when a person is experiencing an exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, basically, of caring too much for others and don't feel the reciprocation, they try to look for another line of work. Really analyze what's going on and see if they can approach things differently or create different boundaries in that work so that it stays at work and doesn't come home,
Yeah, it can happen. Wouldn't you agree that it could happen in relationships that you may have with other people too, where, if you have a friend, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're right. It's not always just on the job. It's in many relationships. Yeah.
Yeah, where you might be the individual that you are always giving advice to your circle of friends or family, or you're always the one person they call at 2 a.m. every Friday night after they've hit the clubs and they've been dumped yet again, or you're always the one that they call when they were fired and need a place to stay. You seem to be the one that they always go to, but when you reach out, they're too busy or they're not there. I mean, I feel like that might be a similar aspect of compassion fatigue.
Yeah, my godmother has recently experienced a few things like that, and a few other people I know where they're the first to help, but not always to receive the help when it's needed, and that's not fair. Of course, life happens, and it's all about intention. So we have to do our best, especially as empaths, not to be the ones who only take, and we have to be the ones to not only give.
So what would you suggest to the person who finds themselves in that situation where they are drained, they're tired, they're exhausted from always being that person? What would be your advice? What would be your advice to that individual?
When awareness of those kinds of things occur, there's an overcompensation that happens after that. So the person might become more bitter or less caring, and because it's a defense mechanism. So it's all about finding the balance. So I think it's the extreme opposite and find the balance from there. So rather than caring too much or being apathetic, what's the medium? What's the balance there? So I think if we're always striving and looking for the balance as objectively as possible, that's where it's at. Yeah. Everybody, because for some people they might have sexual boundaries, or they might have a lack of sexual boundaries, and another person might experience that with material things, or helping other people out or providing shelter for people. It's just so many different aspects of life where a person can be too giving and feel taken advantage of. So a lot of the time I think that compassion and that giving can be redirected in a different way. Right. So it might feel volunteer work, things like that.
Right. And I mean, for me, when people talk to me about it, I talk about, making sure that you have some boundaries in place. And I know you mentioned boundaries earlier too, that, my feeling is set up some sort of boundaries. I need some time that maybe I shut my cell phone off at a certain time so that I can get a full night's sleep if this friend is calling me every Friday night at 2 a.m. Or doing something for yourself, self-care, I think, and I'm sure you go, I don't have any notes, but I'm sure you talk about healing, which we're going to get into too. Healing oneself and self-care is a big issue when you're always giving, making sure you replenish yourself energetically as well. So
the bathtub's great.
yeah. So talking about healing, is there one healing modality that is best suited for the empath when they need to do some of that self-care or they feel they need some healing?
Well, because we're talking about empathy, we're talking about emotion. And so if it's something that deserves therapy or counseling, that is directly emotionally targeted. So that's a really good, solid form of healing, is counseling, therapy, psychotherapy, talking to other people, emotionally processing. That's the big thing for empaths to heal themselves. And then on a more like self-care level, like you mentioned, well, there's like the bathtub and the shower, because anything water related is empathy related. So, and then I do have some magical symbols, Esoteric Empathy book, one of which, I think a couple of which focus on water as an element. And that's, the magical element for empaths. And water is emotion, it is empathy, water rules clairvoyance and the life and death cycle. So if we can tap into water energy, that's super healing. And I think daily prayer, that's a big thing that I talk about in that book too. Daily practice, daily yoga, meditation, ritual, cleansing, drawing down the moon, drawing down the sun, whatever it takes to intentionally connect with the energies of the day. That's very important for empaths, because then we can jump onto the day cycle or the night cycle if you're nocturnal, and ride it out and be a little bit more connected, rather than just feel like we're just at the whim of whatever and just being pulled in whichever direction, which empaths often feel if they're not grounded or.
Exactly. I agree. Water, grounding the earth, I find that's helpful.
Not drinking too much, not smoking too much weed, trying to not numb things too much, just enough, but not too much.
Yeah. Because then you go off of that and you're not balanced anymore. And like you've said, balance is what we're seeking. You talked about discernment. You want to go a little more into what it is and how an empath might use it in their daily interactions with other people?
I think a big mistake that empaths often make is thinking that everybody is as empathic as they are, or as caring as they are. And then when they find out the hard way, they're like, oh, bitch, please, really? Oh, it can often lead to overcompensation, like we've discussed. If an empath can use discernment, they can avoid a lot of those pitfalls of manipulation, and also, just understanding that not everybody emotionally is enough to jumpstart that process. Using discernment doesn't just mean seeing who's good or bad, or seeing which intentions are good or bad, but it's looking at roots, looking at also like the root of conversations. So, what's going on socially to make me feel this way? What is this other person thinking and feeling? What does it feel like? Why do they have their boundaries? So using discernment is really using the cognitive mind and the psychic mind, I would say. So it's very similar to just taking it out of just being in the heart, and bringing it up to the mind as well for processing. And that's part of the whole balancing act for us empaths. Say that traditional psychics who are very in the mind need to bring it to the heart more often too, to find their balance. So it really does go both ways.
It does. It does. I agree. And it is definitely more than just discerning things as good or bad. Because I find that when there's talk about discernment, it's really focused on just the good or bad aspects. But I too find that it's more about finding the root of that, discerning on whether this is, good or bad, but also finding out where that stems from. And then really, like you said, using your head to figure things out, not only just feeling it, but thinking it through too. Yeah, and that was a great, not just the one, but that was one of the things in the book that I hadn't really come across in other books and other websites and stuff, which I found was really helpful and really gave me something to contemplate when I was reading through the book.
Oh, good.
I enjoyed that. So shielding. You talk about empaths. Everybody talks about shielding. You're an empath. Make sure you have your shields up. What's your advice on people who may have trouble and challenges with trying to establish shielding? Because I've run into people who definitely identify as an empath, but they have issues. They have trouble shielding themselves. What's your advice on that?
Empaths notoriously have trouble shielding. And my friend Michelle Belanger, who wrote The Psychic Vampire Codex and The Psychic Energy Codex and many other books, we were talking on the phone like 10 years ago and about empathy, and she said, empaths can't shield like everybody else, I'm like, really? Is that why I'm having so much trouble with it? And she's like, yeah, empaths have different receptors open. People who are very empathic have a different kind of shielding they need to do. So I go into that in a chapter in the book, as you know, and I don't discourage empaths from shielding energetically. In fact, I encourage that on a daily basis, especially if somebody's really struggling socially and struggling with self-esteem issues and social issues, to really shield themselves on a daily basis. But those shields, unlike people who are not as empathic, can topple down very easily and can be derailed really easily because we're so emotionally sensitive. If we take something personally, if someone says, oh, your hair looks weird today, and we're like, oh my God, I'm ugly, and then that negative mental cycle begins. It's like, boom, there go the shields, bye. So it's like, whereas somebody who might not take things as to an emotional place, they could still have the shields up. They'd be like, oh, whatever. It's just a different kind of response. So if empaths and really emotionally sensitive people internalize a judgment or a self-judgment, those shields can topple down. That we could have worked for a week to put them up, and then boom, there it goes. But luckily, something that I talk about in my book is that those shields can go right back up. It's not like they're just gone and farewell. It's, they can come right back up. You can call those shields right back up, especially if we're working with those shields on a regular basis. You can just be like, okay, I'm going to ground and center. I'm going to call forth my guides, gods, guardians, higher self. I'm going to visualize the shield that I've been working on so much and just call it back and create that shield, recreate it, bring it back up. And I liken that to, a candle flame. So you blow out the candle and it's still smoking. Then you can take the match and hold it like an inch above the candle flame, and it'll jump back to that flame or jump back to the wick and relight that candle. So I think the shields are a lot like that too. Even if they come down, you can still put them right back up. They'll just come back up into that imprint that we've been creating, that egregore, that psychic imprint. So they'll resurrect pretty quickly. So as long as empaths can constantly mind their shields, then I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, I agree. Renee, any questions that pop out at you?
Yeah, I'm trying to find where someone that I felt was appropriate. I just had it highlighted. Well, one of them is like a very simple question. Do you, and I think the question actually ends up being the definition of being an empath, but it's, do you feel other people's feelings as your own?
Right, that is a definition of empathy. Yeah, feeling other people's feelings and emotions as one's own. And that can be very difficult to discern what's mine and what's somebody else's. And that's where that discernment comes in once again. What is mine and what's somebody else's. So a girl named Crystal Broderstow in the Empaths report 101 online, I mentioned her in my book also. She, as a solution for that, for cultivating that discernment between what is mine and what is or other, she recommends rewinding emotionally and just thinking back, okay, how was I feeling 20 minutes ago? How about an hour ago? How about yesterday? When did I become off kilter? When did I become so manic? And where are these emotions coming from? Are they coming from me? Is it a mental imbalance, or is it just having a bad day? Did I sleep poorly? You know, am I stressed about money? What's going on? So is it the self or is it the other? Oh, wait, I was just around somebody who was being really negative and really judgy. And maybe that's where I got this negativity. Maybe that's where it came from. So it's all about rewinding and tracing back, you know, our experience through the day or through the last week or what have you, just to find out where these emotions might be coming from. But the thing is, it's a give and take too. It's not always just another person, and it's not always just the self. It's a combination. We have to, you know, realize the extent to which other people's emotions are snowballing our own, and vice versa.
Yeah,
Easier said than done.
Yeah, I was just going to say interpersonal relationships with family, with friends, with significant others, with coworkers, with neighbors. It gets so complicated sometimes.
Definitely. And then our internal monologues too.
Oh, yeah.
It's like ourselves.
Did you find any other ones? Any other? Okay.
Yeah, one is, what is the strangest empathic experience that you've ever had? Or name one. You may not want to say the strangest. So, I'm avoiding some of these questions here on the other side.
Oh, you don't have to avoid any questions. I'm an open book. Well, I recently wrote an article for the Magical Almanac 2018, which is out now, or maybe, 2018. So it's available now. But myself and a lot of my friends and community members, we all write for the Llewellyn Annuals, Magical Almanac, which is companion, which is calendar, which is date book, herbal almanac, things like that. But I wrote one recently for the Magical Almanac. It's about what to do when negative entities and negative things come around, and different techniques of protection and magic and whatnot when there's kind of negative invasion, possession, haunting, things like that. So I discuss one of my experiences in there, which does correspond to empathy as a strange empathic experience. So in that article, I discuss when I went to Eugene, Oregon on book tour for my second book, Shadow Magic Compendium.
Great book.
Thank you. I was doing a driving tour, and I was supposed to, after my book signing and tarot readings, I was supposed to have somebody come and show me around Eugene, but something happened and they couldn't, and so I was just on my own. So I was just wandering around and just, wandering downtown, feeling kind of lonely, and then wandering to these different places and before crashing in my hotel. But then weeks after that point and weeks after that, I felt this increasing sensation right here. And it just kept on building and building. And I don't normally sense spirits and things like that very well. I'm, like I said, more empathic. I'm not very good with mediumship or spirit sensing. I know a lot of people who are, but that's just not my main forte. But this is just so palpable, like a weight here. And it felt like this woman, this desperate woman who was just trying to, almost like a succubus. And it just kept on recurring. At first I thought, I'm like, whoa, it must just be hallucinating. But it just kept on becoming heavier and heavier. And I realized that she latched onto me during that experience in Eugene. And she was a spirit in this certain part of town that I went to. She was just a wandering spirit. So she kind of latched onto me and would try to arouse me and try to stir up my senses. It was the strangest thing, because I'd never experienced any kind of spirit attachment like that, especially that up close and personal. It's like she just kept asking me to open up these different centers on myself and let her in, let her possess me. But I was like, no, it's not going to happen.
Not today. No, thank you.
Yeah, very strange experience. And of course, that was probably a spirit of a person who was killed somehow, who became what the Buddhists might call a hungry ghost, somebody who is just an energy. And there's bajillions of them out there. I just happened to latch onto one. So it took a lot of counseling with elders and magical work to help blast her off and send her off without causing harm, I hope, but rather blasts of light and blasts of magical energy to help send her on her way. So empathically, that was an empathic experience, because I could feel her, and I'm just like, oh no, you feel so desperate. I want to help you. Oh, maybe I should let you merge with me. I should let you possess me. You know, so like empathically, probably not the best idea. So I had to learn that lesson to not do that. And that became a great lesson in discernment too.
Right, exactly.
So, that's one reason why I can't go out to the bars and the clubs as much anymore, because it just becomes a big counseling session for everybody. And I'm happy to help people to the best of my ability. I really am. But suck energy when they've been drinking and not actually schedule an appointment, and not actually schedule readings and spiritual counseling sessions with me, or not actually come to my temple and just want to, latch on in public. That's not fair. That's not reciprocating. That's more draining. But, I'm happy to do that kind of magical work to some extent, but there has to be reciprocation in all aspects of life, and that's okay.
Exactly.
Empaths have to learn that, and that's okay.
Right. And I think that's one of the hardest, maybe not the hardest, but I find a lot of people, myself wasn't, I felt this way in the past, that you feel like it's like an obligation for you to continuously give, and there's sometimes, at least it was for me, when I started saying, I can't do that right now. Can you call me in the morning? Or can you make an appointment for that reading? Or you might be a coworker, but I do this as a professional thing, and setting prices or times or limits or whatever I felt was equivalent. I had guilty feelings in doing that for a long time.
Definitely. If we're in a position where we can financially and materially do that, great. But we have needs too, and
the rent's got to get paid.
And even trades are great too.
Right.
Trades.
Right.
Everybody can reciprocate. Everybody can go pull a weed in the garden.
Right.
And,
Right.
And that creates more self-respect too.
I agree.
To allow reciprocation.
Because we're valuable too. We're all valuable.
Yeah, very much so. So are there some other questions?
Yep, I was just going to ask Renee if there was one last question.
Well, it'll be mine then, because I'll just steal that one.
Okay, you steal that last question.
So, do you feel that there's and you kind of touched on this, but do you feel like there's a correlation with someone walking a shamanic path along with empathy as well? Not just specific to paganism, but the role of being of service.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, shamanism is such a vast term these days, but it always implies working with the spirit world, working with darkness, working with internal and external darkness. And I do talk a lot about that in my Shadow Magic Compendium book that I mentioned earlier.
I told you that, Renee. You need to get that book.
Excuse me, I have like a cart of half of his books. I just haven't ordered it. We have a hurricane coming, and I am not going to try to ship anything till it's done. So,
good luck with the hurricane.
It's not big deal. It'll be all right.
Yeah, I have forest fires. You have hurricanes, so we're all
all
doing the best
special
we
that
can
way.
with Mama Nature.
Yes, ma'am.
So I think empaths, when they can work shamanically in some way through that darkness of oneself or others, then they're really doing solid empathic work, because so much of that dark corresponds to emotion.
Mm-hmm.
It is emotional, has emotional imprints or traumas or you know, different things that need healing.
Mm-hmm.
Shamanism in its different forms works with, you know, soul healing on so many levels. So like shamanic soul retrieval is one thing that I like to do with people, very rarely, but sometimes when people need it, we do that in person, and it can be very effective and very surprising.
And very
And
taxing.
that's, yeah. So if we can replenish ourselves emotionally after those sessions, and find that balance, then it's very healthy, I think. And empaths can be very effective at that sort of healing. And shamanic work in general.
I just wanted to read this one section. I had it tagged from way back in February, but I think it's even more apt now. I just wanted to read this last paragraph on page 249 under magical empathic transmutation. So this is Raven's words. If you had a copy, I'd let him read it. Do you have a copy of your book in front of you? No?
No.
All right. I do, so I'm going to read it. Using the magical methods offered in this section, I encourage you to tap into the realities of those who may not be acting responsibly here on the earth plane, those who are trapped in cycles of insatiable greed, domination, and a lust for power can be emotionally accessed through remote empathic magical work. We can help, in some measure, transform the emotions and ways of thinking that lead some people to engage in devastating behaviors. By working empathic magic through the art of projection, we can tap into the subtle planes of another person's experience and influence their personal spiritual awakening in a process of transforming their perspective from something limiting into something expansive, something divisive into something compassionate, if even just a little bit. Yeah, I
So
tagged
that's one.
that. That is so, I mean, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you.
It's a very unique chapter in that book, is the magical work for empaths, because like you read, I believe that empaths can and have the responsibility to tap into really dark things, and like Renee mentioned, you know, the shamanic work, that sort of style, things not only for the self and other, but for the world, and helping change and transmute those energies, because empaths do have the ability to transmute. We aren't just sponges. We don't just suck up emotion. We can give it too, just as well as we can take it. And that's something that a lot of young empaths don't um, um, and or understand. So with doing intentional magical work on an empathic level, we can tap into other people, other experiences, other like global crises even, and tap into that energy and shift it and transform it. And if we can learn to do that from a healthy place, that can be very balancing, because we receive all of these imprints and emotions. So we got to do something with it. We got to send it back. We got to alchemize it and transmute it. We can't just suck it up and absorb it and then we can take this and craft it. And this is where the magical work really comes into play. We can craft the energies that we receive. We can work with those energies that we absorb or that come from within us, and we're good. So in that section, I talk about different ways, different things, different paradigms and situations that empathic magicians can like I have an anecdote in there, a story of when I was at a water slide with some friends, and I climbed up really high, and I was like, oh man, I'm up really high. Oh man, I have this fear of heights, and oh man. And so to that fear, I chose to tap into everybody else's fear in the world who had that sort of fear about them, and transmute it, change my own, do some deep breathing and project some light to myself, to everybody out there who is experiencing that vibration at that moment. So that is an empathic, magical act of alchemizing and taking that energy, that current, and switching it and shifting it even just a little bit to project more healing and evolution.
Yes, that's wonderful. Well, our time is up now.
It's been wonderful.
Thank you for being on the show. This was great. And thank you all in the chat for, we just don't have enough time. I don't know what else. I know there's been a whole bunch of conversation going on in the chat. So hopefully.
Hi, everybody in chat.
Yeah.
Okay. Go to my website.
Yes.
To read more about the book.
All his links are in the information section too. So did you want to, what was your website? Because I know they could get it through Amazon, but what was your website?
Yeah, it's just ravendigitalis.com. And if you order it through me, I can autograph it for you too.
Yeah, I didn't get to get an autograph copy.
I'll send you one.
No, that's okay. No, don't. I have a copy. I bought a copy and then I received the copy. So I'm going to gift it to one of my friends that I think would be very, it would be very helpful for them to have a copy.
Great.
Thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you all in chat.
Let's do it again.
Oh, all right. Yeah. If you're willing to come on again, we can talk about your other book. Or we could talk about whatever. Stay on the line. Stay on with me and we'll figure something out.
Sure.
Everybody, next week, August 31st, I have Reverend Campbell is going to be on the show with us, and we're going to be talking about comparing and contrasting satanic witchcraft with traditional witchcraft. We're going to be talking about that next week. And then I will put up the September schedule on the CricketSong Facebook page next week, so you know who's coming on for the month of September. And I want to thank Karen Gerlinger, the official sponsor of the Sacred Circle. If you want to find out how you too can sponsor the Sacred Circle, check out Lunar Wisdom's Patreon page. And for just $1 a month, you get access to 4 exclusive videos of The Quest Within, where Alex and I discuss all types of spiritual aspects and topics and concepts. So check that out. If you just can't get enough of me, you can go get some more. Anyway, thank you all. We'll see you here next week. Renee, thank you for helping out as always. And I love you all. Love you. See you next week.